Now?
Yes, thank
All
you.
right. Thank you for mentioning. So, Bismillah, Assalamu alaikum once more. We're very honored to have you all with us. So let us just briefly present the session today. So the session today will be about the psychology of Ramadan, which is a very important topic indeed, because we're all going through this blessed month, and which psychological benefits are we getting from this holy month of Ramadan, together with Professor Ramzi Taleb from Canada. Such an honor to have you with us today, dear Ustad. Thank you for taking your time. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. So today's agenda, dear excellent brothers and sisters, we just start by reciting Surah Al-Fatiha, and just briefly, welcoming you guys and just some guidelines for the lecture today. And then you see that we will give a certificate of appreciation to all of you, excellent members and participants, because without you, we don't have any movement. So you guys are so important for the movement, and you're all doing such an amazing work locally and globally. And then we'll present the lecture with Professor Ramzi. After the lecture, we will have a 30-minute Q&A session, and we will just end up with some closing du'as. So let's start before the Zoom etiquette. Just recite Surah Al-Fatiha, everybody. So Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Malik yawmiddin. Iyyaka na'budu wa iyyaka nasta'in. Ihdina as-siratal mustaqim. Siratal ladhina an'amta alayhim ghayril maghdubi alayhim wala dhalin. Barakallahu feekum. So please, if possible, dear excellent brothers and sisters, keep muted. We don't allow open question through the microphone. Not that we don't appreciate it, we do, but it's because of time constraints and technical constraints. So if you have any question, please add them to the Zoom chat, and we will address them to Professor Ramzi and the Q&A part of the session, inshallah. No recording and screenshots are allowed, but the recordings will be uploaded on ISIP's YouTube channel after the session, and we will share the link to ISIP's YouTube channel, to our WhatsApp groups and other resources, and the Zoom chat as we proceed during the session. For live transcription, for all of you who need live transcriptions, please press the More button at the Zoom, and then just ask for a request, and we will give that request to you, inshallah. A little bit about ISIP before we start, dear excellent brothers and sisters. ISIP tries to be an inclusive space designed to connect people with diverse backgrounds interested in the field of Islamic psychology. We always emphasize on diversity. This is something we believe in because this is part of our sunnah and our tradition, Islam. And the Ummah is a diverse community of people. We try to reflect that. We have a big ethnical, diverse group of people in our movement, people with different educational backgrounds, different age groups. And it's really a blessing to be part of this movement. We also aim to disseminate knowledge, share resources, and discuss best practices in a free and accessible manner. So everything we do in ISIP is free of charge. All of our lectures, seminars, programs, courses, support groups, supervision groups, resource sharing groups, different groups for people who suffer from trauma or revert mental health, you name it. All of our initiatives are free of charge, so that everybody, no matter which social, economical background you have, can benefit from the sacred knowledge of Islamic psychology, and to get that support you need in your excellency with your practical application of it or your studies. We also want to be a platform to enable further development of people's personal and professional interests, studies, and understanding of Islamic psychology within their communities and countries of origin. So even though we're an international movement, we have a lot of local chapters and regional chapters, so that the international initiative can benefit your local community. So we have ISIP local chapter in Southeast Asia, in the Oceania region, in the Southern African region, in Middle East and North Africa, in different European regions, North America, you name it. And if you're interested to join our local or regional chapters, or benefit from other aspects of ISIP or become a member, feel free to go to our website, www.isip.foundation. There you can also get access to our digital library. Also, you will find avenues of how to join our different task forces, or local or regional chapters, or the international movement. Also, subscribe to our YouTube channel so you can see all the lectures after they're done. And yeah, you can also join one of our Islamic psychology WhatsApp group, where we do a lot of resource sharing and dissemination of knowledge. And Sister Fatima and Sister Shireen will add the link into the Zoom chat. I also want to thank Sister Shireen and Sister Fatima for helping out with the lecture today. You're both doing such an amazing work. So now we're moving forward to today's lecturer. We're very honored to have him with us, mashallah, from Canada. Professor Ramzi Taleb has a Ph.D. dissertation in Amir Abdul Kadir al-Jazairi, and the works of Amir Abdul Kadir al-Jazairi, one of the great, excellent scholars in Islamic history, and one of the freedom fighters as well, subhanAllah. He's an instructor and lecturer at Western University, University of Toronto. Specialty in North African Islamic Spirituality and Quranic commentary and mystical theology. Publications included the Shadidiyah, foundational teachings and practices. We're also very honored to have Professor Taleb as part of the ISIP's advisory panel, and we're very honored to have you with us. So this is a certificate to you, dear Professor Taleb, Ramzi Taleb, for all the excellence you're doing, and for us as ISIP to show appreciation for your time and your efforts and recognition of your continuing excellency in the field of Islamic psychology. And we will send this to you afterwards as well. Barakallahu feekum, Ustad. We also want to just make some highlight our next lecture series. Actually, as you know, we do twice a month lectures in English, but this is our second lecture series that we're going to do in collaboration with Al-Ghazali Chair, ISTAC IIUM, the International Islamic University of Malaysia. Together with ISIP, we will offer a 5-part lecture series on Islamic psychology from the Ghazalian perspective with Dr. Osman Bakar, which is one of the great scholars in modern era when it comes to Islamic thought. So please don't lose this opportunity to learn from one of the excellent scholars in the field. The registration closes May the 7th, and it's free of charge, and you will get an e-certificate upon completion of the series, and we will do some short assessments as well after each lecture, inshallah. The first day for the lecture will be May the 7th, and then we will have lectures once a month, so that it will be during a duration of 5 months. So we hope that you all can join, inshallah. It will be such an honor to have you with us, dear excellent brothers and sisters. Information about this you can find on our website. Also, Sister Fatima and Sister Shireen will share in the Zoom chat, and also in our WhatsApp groups, we will share more information as well. We pray that Allah blesses you and your family and all of the Ummah with the witnessing of Laylatul Qadr, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us from the people He saves, forgives, and loves. Inshallah. Ameen. Yes, without any further ado, please forgive us for any shortcomings and make dua for us. And please fill out the short feedback form at the end of the session. So I will stop sharing my screen. And without any further ado, let's give digital applause and welcome our excellent teacher, scholar, Murabbi, Professor Taleb, Ramzi Taleb. The floor is yours. Barakallahu feekum.
Well, barakallahu feek, Sayyid Jamal, Sayyid Jamal, Sayyida Fatima, and Sayyida Shireen for inviting me to this wonderful, collaborative session. It's not only a lecture, it's really an interactive, collaborative session. And I'm this is probably one of the most important initiative in our era. The SIP is a really major undertaking of a unprecedented scale. And I'm really grateful, alhamdulillah, that God is giving, because of their good intention, their pure intention, He's giving them the success, the perseverance, and the fervor to really pursue one of the most much needed perspective in our time, inner or Islamic psychology for the Muslims. So Bismillah, before I begin, inshallah, we're going to bi'idhnillah speak about the inner psychology of Ramadan. Before inshallah we begin, A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, Ar-Rahmanir Rahim, Maliki Yawmiddin, Iyyaka na'budu wa iyyaka nasta'in, Ihdinas siratal mustaqim, Siratal ladhina an'amta alayhim, Ghayril maghdubi alayhim, Waladdallin. آمين. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا محمد كما صليت على سيدنا إبراهيم وعلى آل سيدنا إبراهيم وبارك على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا محمد كما باركت على سيدنا إبراهيم وعلى آل سيدنا إبراهيم في العالمين إنك حميد مجيد وسلم تسليما كثيرا. So inshallah, I'm going to share with you my screen so we can walk together through the slides. Inshallah, let me just give a second here. Let me know that if you can see it, Sayyid Jamaluddin, is it visible?
Yes, Ustad. Maybe you can use, Ustad, presentation mode so that it will capture the whole screen.
Okay. All right. So I suppose I go.
It's if you go on the bottom of the PowerPoint presentation. Yeah, there is one of those tabs that will give you full access. Let me see. I think it's the right. I don't know if that's the one.
Okay.
Let's see. I think the one on the next one on to the right, that one. I think that is the one.
This one. Oh, yeah, there you go.
Yeah,
Pardon me,
perfect.
I'm very new. I'm trying to, as the year goes on with the pandemic, adapt to technology. And so sometimes it takes me a while to get through this, but alhamdulillah, I'm glad that we have people like you who can really train us and in these, methods. Barakallah fiqh. So,
MashaAllah.
Bismillah, Barakallah fiqh, Sayyid Jamaluddin. Welcome everyone. Ramadan Kareem. I pray, inshallah, that this last 10 days will be abundant in blessings and graces, inshallah, and that you will harvest all the deeds of your devotion, inshallah ta'ala. So just before we begin, of course, I mean, I'm trained in academia, but I also have a traditional training in Islamic teaching. I grew up in Algeria, and my formal training was with my grandfather. But as time has changed, we have, of course, began for Muslim to adapt to different, terminologies and the context in which we live, to devise new methods of accessing or actually readapting the foundational teaching of Islam to a kind of contemporary needs. So I'm not trained in psychology as such. I mean, for example, Sayyid Jamaluddin is actually a clinician. He has actually his training in that, professional training. But any Muslim, any practicing Muslim is basically working and has been working for a century with what you might call the practical psychology of the Holy Prophet, alayhi wasalam. So eventually the practical psychology of the Prophet becomes theorized over time, and in our time we call it psychology. But in a sense, psychology really fits into one of the dimensional teachings of prophetic psychology, really a holistic psychology when it's actually sacred, as use a very important term. Sacred psychology is a holistic element. It doesn't really address just the physical or the psychic. It really addresses every element of the human self, including, of course, if you put it in Islamic terms, it addresses or it treats the physical, the psychological, and the spiritual element. So, but psychology as such in our time, the way we're actually understanding that, we are actually understanding that this in a holistic term. So we are understanding the implications of using this term, but without falling into the trap of thinking that the psychology of devotion, the psychology of sacred month, the psychology of Islamic rituals, every element, practices, or application is going to address multiple dimensions of the human self. So, and this is how the ISIP has conceived of it, how they are trying to basically channel the different element, or the premises of prophetic psychology into our modern kind of language. So just to clear the ground for that. All right, so here we are. We're going to basically walk through these few elements in this lecture. First, we're going to speak about the Ramadan as the kernel of the Hijri calendar month. And the kernel means really the substance of all the Islamic calendar is kind of condensed and synthesized in the month of Ramadan. Then afterward, we're going to walk through what I have kind of, just to put it in kind of modern terms, speak about Ramadan as a kind of a month-long spiritual rehabilitation centers of the heart. This is what it does. It's 1 month where you are much deeply concerned with the inner cultivations of the heart, and that month really tries to recalibrate the different element of your spiritual relationship with God, with the Holy Prophet alayhi wasalam, and anything that really affects your spiritual progress and spiritual awareness. We're going to then talk about Taqwa as the central objective, or the very objective of Ramadan revolves and center on this virtue, the virtue of Taqwa. We're going to talk about it a little bit more as I go to the slide. Then we're going to move about use as fasting, why fasting has been designed, or you would say distinctly used as one of the most efficacious spiritual devotion that helps you would say the patient lift certain veils of the heart. Fasting has this distinctive way to do this, penetrate the certain veils of the heart and lifting these veils. So we're going to talk about psychological, physiological veils, and so on and so forth. Then we're going to speak about this correlation between, there is in one day in the Ramadan, there's always a correlation. Your days are going to revolve around a day. The sun, when the sun is up, you are in a state of fasting, but then you have an element of consuming your food, breaking your fast, and then it's going to this what I call the month-long spiritual rehabilitation center of the heart is going to teach you a lot more about you might say the etiquettes of consuming food, the etiquettes of certain rites of the faith, like fasting, not really dealing in a sense, it's not trying to tell you how to engage in an excessive monastic regiment, but it just gives you just the right perspective on basically the Islamic perspective, the prophetic perspective of moderations. And fasting has a way of affecting almost every vice and every impulse in the soul. It works really effectively with many different dimensions of the human self to bring out that spiritual potential. Finally, we're going to end the discussion with what I called here the Ramadan harvest, the harvest of Ramadan. And I put it in semicolon, wearing the fragrance of veneration for the rest of the year. How do you carry the veneration, the sacredness of Ramadan throughout the year, inshallah ta'ala. So let us begin. First, I spoke about the element of the kernel of the lunar year. A lot of you, anyone who observes the fast on any plane or any level, is going to become within the first few months going to be or at least the first few days recalibrated. Your life is no longer going to revolve around the clock, the more kind of, you could say, the superficial element of your routine. The lunar calendar, the phases of the moon are going to start, they're going to have a very direct impact on your spiritual relationship with God. So there is something to be said about this. In the other months of the year, we are, you'd say, maybe a little bit more minimally conscious of the phases of the moon and how they affect your devotions. But in Ramadan, we are by force connected to how the moon is going to progress. And that has a direct reflection on your own, if you could put it this way, your own inner moon, because the phases of the moon are going to basically shape and determine your devotions. So being really, really mindful of how sacred months prescribed by God have a very different impact on your devotions is something to always bear in mind after you not only Ramadan but afterwards. I wanted to take this anecdote that I've always loved, especially as I grew I grew up in Algeria when I was a younger a man. The anecdote, of course, speaks about the companions. We very often have, depending on the degree of our reverence and veneration for the what you call the rights of God or sha'airillah. When Ramadan, if you are in the Muslim world, probably you have a very different qualitative experience of the oncoming of Ramadan. But typically, because of the modern context, because of the way our lives are structured and arranged, it's very rare when someone is preparing for Ramadan 6 months ahead. But if you read this quote from the Musnad of Imam Ahmad, which I'm going to read for you, it gives you a very different mindset. You could a very different psychology of a community, the entourage of the Holy Prophet ﷺ, and how devotions and sacred month and the other world was basically how their mindset and psychological intention was so fixated on basically the sacred month of Ramadan. So I quote, the companion, radiallahu anhum, were intensely and fervently vigilant in their preparation of the month of Ramadan. They used to beseech God for 6 months that he may bless them with another Ramadan and petition him for another 6 months to accept their fast and their devotion. In this state of mind, the whole year was like a month of Ramadan. This really gives us almost an unprecedented perspective on how your bond with God, how your relationship with the rights and prescriptions of the faith, and of course with the Sunnah of the Prophet alayhi wasalam, has a very different quality when we speak about the companions. For us, a lot of us have many different engagement and commitment during Ramadan. They come and creep into our lives, sometimes out of our control. But there is something to be said just about the intentions of welcoming and keeping almost track of the day, walking you through Ramadan completely changes how the quality of Ramadan and of your devotion changes. Very often what happens is we prepare maybe a few days earlier, or for others, maybe just the day before, you just wait for the announcement, the moon sightseeing announcement, and then you try to physically force yourself into this new rhythm and new month. And often, and unfortunately, we end up disappointed by the time the Ramadan goes away. We are basically get to palpably taste the quality of Ramadan. Everything is multiplied. The devotion, the dhikr, the remembrance of God, every sajda, every prostration is. But then, if the preparation and the veneration was not there, you will typically notice that in how your Ramadan develops for you, how you evolve and progress every Ramadan. So this gives you a perspective on how to approach your mindset. Usually, just the intention of actually fixating your himma, your aspiration on a sacred month. That is actually what makes a sacred month like Ramadan never the same. Every Ramadan will be not just a similar Ramadan, but something much more of an intensified experience of a sacred month. So the example I use, and I use that also with just with this picture earlier. You have the phases of the moon as you see them here, and then you have a tree in the center of the moon, or at least growing from the basically through the moon, right? But that actually refers to this principle of any spiritual devotion, any spiritual progress, any development of the soul, or maturation or ripening of certain virtues of the soul. They are essentially reflections, or they mirror how a tree grows. A tree does not grow, if any of you are work in agriculture or have experience or in these domains of farming, or in ecology, you are quite aware that natural trees take several decades to grow and mature and blossom, and so does the tree of Ramadan. This is what this quote and this anecdote of the Sahaba, and how they were always vigilant about Ramadan, how they divided the entire year between preparing for Ramadan or beseeching God to bless them with another Ramadan, and then they spend another 6 months beseeching God or petitioning God to accept their devotions. This is an exemplification of how a spiritual tree grows in the soul. Everything, I mean, as what I said earlier, that the kernel of the lunar year, if you see it in the way that the Sahaba actually lived it, the mindset they were in, they literally, and even Imam Ahmed in this quote, he mentions that for the companions in the first generation in the Salaf, it was as if there was only 1 month in the year. the Ramadan was the kernel of the entire year. So because of this mindset of spending 6 months beseeching God, 6 months asking God to accept their fast and their devotions, you could say that the inner state of the mind of the companions was really living always intensely and fervently in 1 month. And this is how you could say, this is how they understood quite well from the teaching and the applications of the Prophet, the Holy Prophet alayhi wasalam, that the tree, like just as the natural trees take several decades, sometimes months, depending on the climate and the species of the tree to grow, so the tree of Ramadan does not grow in 1 month. This is one of the mistaken belief and unfortunately regrettable perspective that a lot of us have, that within a month you cannot really grow a tree, a spiritual tree. Please forgive me, I have to let my cat out. He's sorry. Bye. Pardon me. I have pets here, and sometimes they have ways of interrupting my speech. So alhamdulillah, I was speaking about the growing of the tree of Ramadan, and the Ramadan is usually either a time of planting more seeds or of harvesting the fruits of the previous Ramadan. This is a very important mindset for carrying through the past Ramadan, and also having this rhythm, this inner preparations of the month. And this whole thing boils down to one principal element. For the Sahaba, dividing the whole year into 6 months and 6 month preparation, besieging God and petitioning, this is an expression above all of the reverence, veneration for the sacred rituals and sacred rites and months of God. When there is reverence is what we call ta'zim. In the Quran, it says, one of the verses in Surah Al-Hajj, the venerations of the waymarks of God is among the signs of Taqwa, of God-fearing or reverential love of God. So for you to actually reap or harvest or see the spiritual reverberations of the holy month throughout the year, what the most fundamental intention is really veneration. The more veneration you have for the sha'a'ir of God, which is the everything that God has sacralized. The month of Ramadan is one of the sha'a'ir. Mecca, Hajj is one of the sha'a'ir of God. The Umrah is the sha'a'ir of God. The fasting is zakat, zakat prayer. All of these are sha'a'ir. Sometimes the mistake with a lot of us, what we do is we fixate our mind on the quantity of deeds. For example, we don't really think about the placement or the foundational place of veneration. We think about how much you do, how many devotions you do, how many times or even if it's one time, you recite the entire Quran in Ramadan or outside of Ramadan, the nawafil, the supererogatory prayers, and other elements. But sometimes the quantity does not determine the quality of your spiritual relationship with God or your bond. What sometimes really makes a huge or a radical difference is if you have ta'zim, veneration, a really fervent veneration for everything that God has sacralized. This was the element that the Sahaba have really understood with the Ramadan, the month where all the doors of paradise are open, the devils are chained, everything is multiplied. But it was more than just the quantitative element. It was really the veneration for the sacred month that determined the quality of their fast. So let us move to this. And the verse behind this, of course, is Surah Al-Hajj, ayah 32. and all that, and whosoever venerate God's waymark, sha'a'ir, that is of godliness of the heart, taqwa or God-fearingness of God. So it is very interesting how this verse really sums up a central element in approaching Ramadan, because it underlies and highlights that one of the signs of godliness, of taqwa, it's not here in Surah Al-Hajj, it's not saying one of the signs of taqwa, of godliness or God-fearingness of God, is many deeds multiplied. It says one of the signs, and whosoever venerates God's waymark, sha'a'ir, that is of God, the godliness of the heart. This is a very inward disposition of the soul, and it's much more to do with how your intention shapes the quality of your devotion. So let us move to the next one. So I've conceived of this, I suppose it's a more of a clinical element, or rephrasing of articulations of how we approach Ramadan. If you read the famous ayah on the Quran, Ramadan, about the prescribing of Ramadan, it says, "O believers, ya ayyuha alladhina amanu, kutiba alaykum as-siyam kama kutiba ala alladhina min qablikum la'allakum tattaqun." So prescribed for you is the fast, even as it were prescribed for those that were before you, haply that you will be God-fearing. لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ. So this verse basically gives you the formula, the exact formula for why fasting was prescribed and why it was what it was intended for. The gharad, the objective of Ramadan, gives it to you in a few lines. So it's in many ways, when you fast for Ramadan, as you walk through different phases of Ramadan, this is really the campus that you should be always reorienting your devotions in light of this verse. Sometimes when we forget what God is actually demanding from us, we basically are distracted completely. Our attention is a bit more fragmented, and we forget about what is really the quintessential objective of Ramadan. But the Quran puts it in a few words. It says, prescribed for you the fasting as it was prescribed for those before you, for one and single reason, so that you will be happily, you will be God-fearing. So the month of Ramadan, if I put it this way, is analogous, very much analogous to a month-long spiritual rehabilitation center of the heart. Fasting is a regimen, is a prescription for the restoration of a sound spiritual relationship with God, by which we mean taqwa. So there is, God is prescribing, Ramadan is the center, and within the center there is a prescription. It says very clearly in the Quran, it's prescription. I prescribed for you. It did not say happily that you will be fasting more. The means, the intermediary between taqwa is fasting. So fasting becomes, when you enter the regimen, this very divine celestial regiment of Ramadan, you enter into this hospital, this month-long rehabilitation center of the heart. The Ramadan is going, or the patient is going to be prescribed fasting, and fasting is going to set in motion a lot of work in the soul. It's going to help you, at least facilitate for you, or restore for you, help you restore a very sound relationship with God. That is the purpose. So the desired outcome of fasting, this is the important element that I highlighted. The desired outcome of fasting is taqwa. That is the desired outcome, as the Quran puts it, not as any scholar puts it, or it's as the Quran puts it. So the cardinal Quranic virtue, all of you have read the Quran many times, who are familiar with the virtues of the Quran. These are the virtues that the Quran determines to be the cardinal virtue of the Quran, is taqwa. So the entire Quran, every message of the Quran, the prophetic mission of the Holy Prophet ﷺ, and every other prophetic mission is fundamentally aimed to awaken taqwa in the patient or in the believers. If you have this cardinal Quranic virtue, you have internalized all the virtues of the soul. Taqwa, as some of the theologians would divide and classify the virtues in different grades. Taqwa is the queen of all spiritual virtues. Someone, a woman or a man who has internalized that, has truly come to fulfill, at least to a very high degree, the intention of worship, of ibadah, of taqwa, of very, very reverential love of God. This is another way of actually understanding what taqwa is. God-fearingness is one translation, or godliness, but what it really is a reverential love of God. Taqwa is when you have a reverential love for God. And this is you could maybe, if you grew up in a traditional family with a lot of etiquette, adabs, usually this reverential love is expressed. The first person you have reverential love for is your mother or your father, and sometimes of course, they have their place, and you have intensive love for your parents. But sometimes, for a reason that God knows, it might be that your reverential love is for your grandfather. This was the case for example, for myself. I, of course, very devoted to my mother and my father. But for some, divine reasons, I experienced reverential love with my grandfather, even more so, or with my spiritual masters. So this is how we should maybe understand more taqwa. You develop a very intensive and fervent love of God. So if we put this in a different term, fasting is a prescription, like you are in a sense in a kind of a celestial pharmacy, and the prescription in this celestial pharmacy is fasting. And to understand only that any prescription is only going to be mean to an end, and prescriptions may be effective, may be efficacious in some patients and not always in other patients. And sometimes the efficaciousness of a treatment sometimes, or maybe largely sometimes, depends on the patient too, the receptivity of the patient. So the fasting is only there to as a prescription to internalize a Quranic virtue. The other virtue that work very basically serve, if you have, of course, many of you have fasted for many years, and one of the virtues that become a bit more manifest in Ramadan, and they are the offshoot, the kind of the sub divisions of taqwa, are very patience. You have no other choice in Ramadan but to cultivate patience on all planes, not only patience from withholding or abstaining from food. If your temperament is much more if you have some anger issues or temperamental issues, really, in Ramadan, even if it's hard to maybe to grapple with sometimes your temper or certain impulses of the soul, there is a way in which fasting, which really diminishes the heats of the body, if you could say, you experience a bit much more control, much more, you are coping a bit better with this temperament. You also experience other virtues, like you are more resigned to the ways of God. Really, you are not really centered on doing things. Hopefully not like just shopping and doing things like that. Maybe the last thing maybe in your mind is whether or not something really like a job, a huge job career happens in Ramadan. You're much resigned to how the rhythm of this month is going to refine you before the end of the month. And other virtues basically depends on which of the vices you're working on, might be easily facilitated through the prescriptions of fasting, like compassion and justice. But all of them, all these virtues serve the virtue, the Quranic virtue, the cardinal virtue of taqwa. So here we are, we're going to delve a bit more into taqwa. So we have said that at least from the Quranic perspective, the ayah of Sawm or Siyam, we said that fasting, according to the Quran, is a prescription for cultivating reverential love for God, or taqwa. But it really tells you right away in the Quran, without having to really delve and browse through so many sources, that the intention is the cultivation of an inner virtue. So fasting as a physiological act or practice is not really trying to bring out some kind of physiological effect, although it does. Medically, fasting has a lot of benefits and advantages, as even non-Muslims and other doctors have even confirmed. But as far as spiritual growth and spiritual cultivation is concerned, taqwa is not a matter of deeds as such. These are manifestations of taqwa, of taqwa. So fasting is actually telling everyone who's fasting, abstaining from food, that you are abstaining from food in order to actually penetrate inward, to go inward into yourself. Really, you are fasting because of something about your heart. This prescription is intended to awaken something in the heart. But or let us actually see where the taqwa lies. Where is the site of taqwa? Because we don't actually know. The verse doesn't tell you precisely where is the dimension of the human self where taqwa is cultivated. But of course, we need the Holy Prophet ﷺ to give us important indications on where is taqwa. This is a hadith from Tirmidhi that gives us basically the answer to at least if indeed taqwa is an inward virtue, then we need an indication. And the hadith says that the Messenger ﷺ said, "Do not envy one another, do not inflate prices for one another, do not hate one another, do not turn away from one another, do not undercut one another in trade, but rather be slaves of Allah or servants and brothers among yourselves and sisters among yourselves. A Muslim is the brother of the Muslim. He does not oppress him or oppress her, nor does he fail him, nor does he lie to him, nor does he hold him in contempt. Taqwa is right here." And he pointed to his chest 3 times. Taqwa is right here. Taqwa is right here. It is evil enough for a man to hold his brother or Muslim or sister Muslim in contempt. The whole of a Muslim is inviolable for a Muslim, his blood, property, and honor. Sadaqan Nabi. So we have a clear indication, and in this long hadith, which actually brings out a lot of the element of taqwa. The taqwa, the site, the locus of the taqwa is the heart. The Holy Prophet ﷺ pointed 3 times on here, and he said, "At-taqwa ha-huna, at-taqwa ha-huna, at-taqwa ha-huna." So this hadith at least gives us a critical indication, clarifications on what the purpose and objective of fasting is. لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ. And since taqwa is primarily centered or primarily a spiritual dimension, then we know that anything that has to do with taqwa has to do with the cultivation or the treatment of the illnesses of the heart. And so fasting is going to, in a sense, attempt to facilitate this restoration of the heart. And another hadith I wanted to bring to your attention, so that it adds a supplementary hadith where the Holy Prophet ﷺ is giving us really deeper indications into what is this taqwa, what it's located, what it's concerned with. And he said, "Verily Allah does not look to your bodies nor to your faces, but he looks to your hearts." And he pointed towards he pointed to his heart with his finger, towards the heart. So another hadith that at least comes to clarify and give us important cues or hint into where the taqwa and its relationship to the heart of the believer. And so the key thing we think from this is when fasting is prescribed in this ayah. It was not another ritual. It was not Hajj or Zakat or other ritual. Fasting, if God prescribed fasting and he made that intermediary for the cultivation of taqwa, it's giving us a strong indication that fasting is distinctly able to cultivate taqwa. So this is the thing we take from this verse, and the purposes or the objectives and the mediations, the prescriptions and the treatment of the heart. Now, taqwa is going to be, as we said, distinctly able to refine the heart. And this refinement is going to operate on what we call lifting the veils of the heart, many of them. So if we at least take on the physiological veils, there are a vast body of literature, and some of you're going to be reading Ghazali, and some of you have read him, and many other great spiritual sages and masters of the heart who have written a lot about the different veils of the heart. And so if we go on the physiological veils, and every veil is really just one layer between you and the heart and the spiritual heart, until when you reach that center of your soul, which is the heart, that really is the meeting point, the meeting contact between you and God, you're going to walk in yourself or through yourself to the different layers of yourself before you reach your center. Taqwa, or the heart, is the center of the human self, but it's covered by many layers, including the physiological veils, which is our body. So what does taqwa does? At least fasting, now we are on the facade of fasting, but we're not thinking this of clinical fasting, like these contemporary clinical fasting for the sake of only physical health or restorations of the body. Fasting is prescribed, and it has an impact, a very beneficial impact on physiology. But if it ultimately, when you're a believer, when you fast because of spiritual reasons, then you're taking this as a means, as a channel to actually dig or deeper into yourself. So what fasting does, the abstention from food, it tapers, it diminishes the physiological perceptions of the body. The five senses are not, you would say, hyperactive because of the lack of food and the body. So what fasting does, the less you consume food, your perception, the five senses are much less active, and your heart becomes much more refined and awakened. But when there is a lot of consumption of food, the body is going to be preoccupied. The senses are going to be triggered and prompted by the processes of consuming food, of processing this food. And of course, it actually triggers desires of the senses. You eat with you don't only eat with your mouth. You eat with your eyes, with your hands. You even eat, in a sense. At least there are steps before you consume food, with your smell. All these, if you deprive the body from these from food, the five senses of the body are diminished. They are tapered. This is what at least one of the things that fastings does, because, as I said, excess of food consumption, which is one of the distinctive mark of contemporary food culture, what it does, it actually thickens the physiological crest, right? The skin, the physiological crest becomes thickened. And that's a veil, at least as far as Islamic Quranic psychology, prophetic psychology is concerned. Excessive consumption of food, and certain food even more so than others, they thicken the physiological crest. That crest itself is a veil. Why? Because it's the heart is not if you look much deeper into the nature of the heart, it's not physiological heart, because obviously the physiological heart is also found in animals. Every other species, any other animal has a physiological heart, but you cannot say, I mean, there are literature you can look into, and we can also share with you, the organizers can share with you literature on this element, on what is the spiritual heart. We know that one of the hadith says, al-imanu nurun yaqdifuhu Allah fi qalbi abd al-mu'min. Faith is a light that casts onto the heart of the believing servant. So physiological heart is obviously not what is intended by the heart that connects and bonds with God. It's a spiritual reality that really much more resembles what we call in Islamic Quranic language, the ruh, right? The ruh is actually the heart. The ruh that God blew into Adam وَنَفَخْتُ فِيهِ مِنْ رُوحِي. That's that ruh, the spirit that God insufflated into Adam, into every human being. That is the heart, that is the meeting point, that is the umbilical cord between you and God. It's a spiritual, like just God is a non-material spiritual being. The connective cord between God is the spirit that he blew into every human being. So that's what we mean by the heart. And going back to the point, excess of food thickens the physiological crest. What it does, it clogs and it really fogs the heart. That's on the element of the physiological valve. What also does, we're speaking about the excess of food. There is kind of a series of acts that happen when you basically have excessive consumption of food. Food set the passions of the lower soul in motion. All of you know the term an-nafsul ammaratu bis-su'. We call the lower soul in psychological term. But what the lower soul is usually triggered and prompted, or you might say awakened, through the passions. We call the passion of the soul shahawatun nafs. And food is basically the source, the first source of triggering or activating these passions of the nafs. It doesn't activate. Food does not always necessarily activate the awareness of the heart, but it does activate the passions of the lower soul. We're going to get into this a bit more. But what fasting does, it tries to regulate that. By abstaining from, you're regulating these different layers that can cover the spiritual heart. I wanted to quote a very apt and very pertinent a quote from one of the 19th century great spiritual masters from Morocco, who actually sums up the dynamic between food, fasting, and spiritual awareness as follows. Fasting, he says, it thins. Fasting thins the physiological perceptions. It softens the five senses of the body. For the overconsumptions of food and water thickens the senses. It empowers the valves. Indeed, whenever the senses are decreased, the spiritual dimension of the soul increases. And whenever the senses increases, senses perceptions, the spiritual senses diminishes. So there is a very intricate correlation between the increase of spiritual dimension of the soul and the decrease of the physiological perceptions of the nafs. If there is overconsumption, very much what Ibn Ashiba is saying, the overconsumption, it brings up this level of thickness. And the abstention of food, psychologically and even spiritually speaking, it diminishes that. So the correlation between spiritual elevation or spiritual awareness and physiological awareness has to do with which of the two is actually is going up and which one is being diminished. So now if we put that in kind of an equation, fasting and physiological veils, the chain reaction is this way. You have the food, and then the source of the food, overconsumption of food, the commotions of the passions, it triggers that. And then from the commotions of the passions, there is, of course, the satanic whispers, the waswasat of the shaitan, and the lower soul begins to execute the orders of the whispers. So we have the source. This is the chain reaction that works on at least the physiological level. Can overconsumption of food, the commotions of the shahawat, the passions of the nafs, then it actually goes up to the psychological level, where the consumption, the passion triggers this prompting of Satan, and of course they cause all sorts of, it could be depression, it could be feelings of solitude, of insatisfaction, of discontent, so forth and so on. And eventually it will manifest, it will as actions when the lower soul execute or the orders or the whispers of shaitan. So the chain reaction manifests, for example, it could manifest, this chain reaction can give rise to, some example would be temper. Food, certain kind of food food can set a certain motion in action, like or passion in action, the whispers of the shaitan and lower soul. It might actually bring up, for example, in one person, temper. This chain reaction can bring the vice of temper. And for others, it can bring up the vice of lust. For others, it can bring up the vice of gossiping, denigration, or, for example, physiologically, many of us have experienced that one way or another, that after you consume food, after breaking the fast, you experience laziness, or even outside of Ramadan, laziness, heedlessness, or even it can go even psychologically, maybe not really apparent, or maybe the impressions are not always direct, but this chain reaction can also reach the point where you experience doubt in God's existence, or maybe you become very much lackadaisical, indifferent towards the holiness of the Prophet or the Sunnah, or discontent with God's decree, what He has decreed for you. All of these are not just, they don't just begin on the psychological plane. There's a chain reaction, and of course other element that you can invoke, like of course there are the genetic element and whatnot. We're talking about generic aspect, and even worldliness. All this element can reach to the umbrella of everything, basically the food reaction, and brings up the umbrella of worldliness. There's a reversible reaction, which is through fasting. Fasting actually reverses this order, or maybe more accurately, it regulates that. If what fasting is doing, all of this chain reaction can be completely reordered, or kind of break that or disordered, right? So it regulates that. When you consume less, a lot of the chain reaction is not going to be as effective on yourself, on any element of the human self. So now we want to move to this one of the common hadith that a lot of Muslims know about, that and we can bring this up here and maybe throw some light on how this might be understood. What does it mean that the devils are chained up, right? And this pardon me, a second please. So if the devils are chained up, this is the question we're going to basically bring up, because a lot of Muslims who are practicing observing the fast, they wonder, then if the devils are chained up, who whispers? Why do we still fall prey to certain sins in Ramadan? A very important question that is raised by many, but we can. The Prophet ﷺ has actually given us all of these answers in the hadith and in his sunnah. How do we then understand this hadith? Rasulullah ﷺ said, there has come to you Ramadan, a blessed month which Allah the Mighty, the Sublime, has enjoined on you to fast. In it, the gates of heaven are open, the gates of hell are closed, the devils are chained up, and in it Allah has a night which is better than 1,000 months. Whoever is deprived of its goodness is indeed deprived. I'm going to maybe just focus a bit more on what we call the gates of heaven, the gate of hell, and how this ties up to fasting. So what are the gates of hell and heaven, right? The paradise and its habitant. Another hadith, we have to always bring a very clear hadith where they bring out all the premises that are hidden, sometimes in the Quran or in the hadith or other hadith. So the Prophet ﷺ in Sahih Muslim, the book 53, there is a statement, and it's a Sahih Muslim, an authentic, of course, narration. It says, ﷺ says, paradise is paved by hardship and prohibitions, and hellfire is paved by temptations, or what we called earlier, you could call shahawat, is huffat al-jannatu bil-makarih wa huffat al-naru bil-shahawat, which is temptation or passions. So we have a very important clarity here, a cue, a hint on how do we understand the gates of heaven and hell. The Prophet seems to give a very clear indication that the element of paving through the cultivations of virtue, of actually abstaining from prohibitions, that what God has prohibited the Muslim from doing, what we call the Sharia. These are burdens that the soul is going to carry. It's going to be carrying the burden of abstaining, of refraining from harming, from gossiping, from doing all sorts of sins. But then The hellfire, the Prophet ﷺ says is paved by temptation or passions. And this we have connected earlier to how, I mean, anyone who knows just a little bit, of course, always we do, the culture of food, the culture of fashion, of passion, and all sorts of modern culture that are completely engrossed in temptation. You could say that this is really how you pave your way right into hellfire. So the gates of the heaven are actually, if you read this hadith in light of the hadith of Ramadan, the gates of heaven are ultimately in the soul. This is the fasting, prayers. This is actually one of the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ indicates that there are different gates of heaven, and he named one of them as the gates of Rayyan. It's the gate of fasting. This is a very known hadith about the names of the gates of heaven. There's the gates of prayer. There's the gate of patience. There's the gate of exertion, mujahada or jihad, and the gate of charity, so forth. So as you cultivate these virtues in the soul, in yourself, you are cultivating, paving these gates. You are actually opening this gate for the afterlife. These are the gates. There is no other gate that is not dependent or contingent on what you did in your life. Otherwise, you won't be accountable. So this is where it comes, where the idea of gates of heaven should be concretely framed and within the context of what you do, the good, the righteous deeds, and the sins that you do. This is an important element, not to have a disjoined aspect of gate of heaven that you just find. You just find the gate of heaven, you just stumble on it in the afterlife. You don't stumble on it, you stumble on what you paved. And these are some of all of the prophetic virtues that are enjoined on the Muslims, on us, which are actually burdensome. It's called takalif. In the fiqh tradition, it's called takalif, which means like they are responsibility, duties, and they are actually burdens. They burden the soul. The nafs and amatu bisu does not want to withdraw, to refrain from temptation. So when you do this, you are actually basically going heads on with the ego and Satan. You are basically closing the gates of hell. This is one way of understanding, or maybe probably a very clear way of understanding how the gates of hell are closed in Ramadan. The abstentions of food is going to close a lot of the temptations, a lot of the passions that are triggered by the consumption of food. They are triggered by, by the whispers and the prompting of the ego and of Satan, that work in conjunction with what food does. The food actually prompts and triggers this reaction. So the gates of hell, for example, temper, gossip, all these, impatience, all these vices in the Ramadan, the fasting, operates on so multiple levels. This is why we said distinctly, fasting seems to distinctly work with this cardinal virtue of the Quran, and that cardinal virtue brings together a lot of the other virtue. The gate of hell, of fire, obviously, as a lot of you know, we in the Islamic perspective and theology, we call it nar. It's a fire. It's however it is. It's actually experienced as God knows, but God calls it the fire. And note that the devils, if all of you know, account in the Quran about how the substance from which Adam was created was a clay. And the substance from which the devils and the jinns were created was fire. And Iblis, Iblis refused to bow to Adam, alayhi salam. What was the reason behind him? He said, my substance is better than his, right? You created me from fire, and you created him from clay. And khayrun min, I am better than him. You create me from fire, and you create him from clay. So we know you have to draw these links, connect these dots. You have the element of the gates of hell being closed. We know, in our tradition, at least, the prophetic tradition has told us about the nature of jinns and shaitans, devils and jinns. Both are made of fire. And of course, if you connect the dot, you see that the element of the gates of hell being closed has to do with the presence or the chaining of this of certain forces that are of the fire. Their constitution is from fire, right? And fire is directly connected, as we are talking about here, to passion. temper, lust, gluttony, idleness, laziness, pride, defamation, so on, are all, if you dig really deeper into Islamic psychology, actually develops that. And if you wish, the sisters and brother will maybe point you to many good book, including Layla Bakhtiyar, who passed away, rahimahullah, I believe last year, who wrote great, wonderful books on what you call the enneagrams of the soul. And the enneagrams of the soul is going to give you an idea about the nature, the different properties of the soul. At least traditional psychology, certain element of the soul, they tend towards the coolness, heat, and or maybe dryness, moist. All of these are actually are directly connected to the consumption of food, and the sort of passion they actually trigger are all connected with heat. So temper, lust, gluttony, laziness, physiological, psychological, are associated with the heating of the ego. Everyone who knows about, and all of us have experienced some form of anger and temper, justified or not. And it's even a non-Muslim psychology. Of course, they know that, for example, temper is connected to a high level of basically heat in the blood, right? So heat, there's another equation. The fire, the jinns are created from the fire, and there's also having this property that fire creates, which is heat. And when it's connected to, when you bring the equation together, the shahawat, which actually are heating-like properties, create that in the ego. So the gates of hell, when they are closed, they have to be connected to the passions, and the passion has to be connected to the nature of these forces that are made of fire, and how, if they penetrate the human dimension, they trigger these vices. So what does fasting do? What is the chaining that fasting does? That it chains this passion, it chains and regulate this heat, or you could say it chains and regulate these passions of the soul. Absence of food is presence of coolness. You are much, even physiologically, and maybe not for everyone, but the body becomes much cooler when it doesn't consume food, and it's less prompt to quick temper, less prompt to enact certain sins and certain passions. There is an elevation of the luminous dimension of the soul. Earlier I quoted for you Ibn Ajiba. It's worth it actually to go back to to go back to this, just the last line. Whenever the senses are decreased, the spiritual dimension of the soul increases, and whenever the senses increases, the spiritual senses diminishes. And this is what we mean by fasting regulates these passions, but what it also does, it elevates. There's an elevation of the luminous dimension of the soul. And one of the hadith that many of you, I'm sure, know, and the Prophet ﷺ quote, is that the devil flows in man or human being like his blood, right? And this has to do, of course, with again, we talked about how the consumption of food can actually trigger the presence, or you could say the commotion of certain forces within. And the blood is, of course, the place or the site where a lot of these psychological element of the soul, depressions, hate, all of sorts of vices are triggered when the blood is heated, when the blood is actually you say tends to the fire property, then these passions comes up. So if the devils are pardon me, I think we've seen this. Yes. So we said that if the devils are chained up, the question, the bigger question that we wanted to take up is, if they are chained up, who whispers? Why do we still fall prey to certain sins in Ramadan? It may be not great ones, but when the devil are chained up, what remains is the lower ego. The nafs al-amara does not leave the person. It's very, very, unless they have a very high refinement of the soul, prophets, saints, and other fervent, the companions and other fervent Muslims who are really intensive spiritual force. Their amara is regulated, but it cannot be completely obliterated. So when the devils are chained in Ramadan, it doesn't say that the nafs is chained. The nafs is still operative. It's working, as you say, solo during Ramadan. And you will be, if you are vigilant, have a very, really clearly, much vigilant about yourself in Ramadan, you're going to, I'm going to get into this, how you're going to discern between the presence of the absence of shaitan, when he's chained up, and the presence of the ego, nafs al-ammara, during Ramadan. Pardon me. So fasting teaches you concretely to discern this. It teaches you to concretely discern the prompting of your ego from the prompting of Satan. How? You become more aware of your impulses, vices, and dispositions. When, pardon me, when Satan is actually receding, when the prompting of are chained up, what remains is the vices, the impulses that you have accumulated during a lifetime. You're going to have certain impulses. Impulses have to do with your own disposition. If you impulses, like you are much more inclined to anger, to gossiping, to cheating, to all of these things, to injustice, immorality. This has a lot more to do with the storage of your soul, what you have accumulated during a lifetime. When the devils cannot whisper, what remains in the soul are basically the impulses, the disposition and you're going to become more aware. Maybe impulses include, maybe someone, if his soul is a bit more gluttonous, very much engrossed in consumptions of food, watching a lot of TV or God knows other these are vices too. They are vices. You will see it. You will feel that almost constriction during Ramadan, that you can't really just freely extend your hand to eat. You cannot freely just be temperamental. There's something there that really makes you aware of, okay, even if it's Ramadan, shaitan is not omnipresent, there are certain things that you will do that kind of triggers, it gives you signals, like really signals about what are these dispositions that are ingrained in you. And it could be any habit. Really, it could be, especially with in our context, the habit could be as bad as a vice of idleness in Ramadan, as bad as just what you call killing time is an impulse. Temper is an impulse. Overeating and when you break your fast, you're fasting, when your mind is fixated on breaking your fast and just all the things that you can eat. This is telling you, your nafs is telling you this is a disposition of vice. Satan has maybe helped it to develop these vices, but when he's chained, what remains is really your nafs, what it has basically harvested. So what fasting also does, it actually teaches you to inhibit them. You inhibit these passions and vices more effectively than any other form of worship. Fasting is going to be, when you inhibit certain vices and dispositions, your mind, you're going to experience a higher degree, maybe not intensive, a higher degree of khushu', of a lot of concentrations, contemplative attention during salat. You're going to be more, maybe less temperamental, more forgiving. You of course, you're going to eventually, even food is not going to be, even if you have this inclination, disposition for just food consumption. In Ramadan, physiologically it shrinks, and after a few minutes you're all done, and you don't experience that. You don't experience this kind of you see it manifests right before yourself. Maybe in the first few days, it tells you, look how much you have this dispositions of over consuming. After a few weeks, fasting comes and it inhibits them. It facilitates a lot of the bad habits. I mean, a lot of people actually who consume cigarettes and have a very difficult problem, quitting cigarette, and they have tried clinical element, all sort of treatments. If they have just a level of degree of reverence for Ramadan and God, for some reason they just stop. I know some people who do it, and when Ramadan kicks in, within a month they have smoked for 30 years and they don't smoke for a month, and that tells you. I said earlier about the incredible laser sharp effectiveness of fasting in working and tempering and kind of refining many vices at once simultaneously. So you become, of course, more spiritually vigilant. You have a lot of muraqabah of what you do, what you say, what you think. Even when your nafs al-ammara slips, says something inappropriate about someone, you feel the constriction in your soul, and you're thinking this, you know you are in the climate of a sacred month. You become a bit more watchful. Outside of Ramadan, you might not even pay attention to that. So what happened in fasting also, there is a frontal war, not with the passions and as such. Passion meaning really grave sins. In Ramadan, you're not really, I mean, if you do that, you're not really, I don't think someone would observe their fast, they're engaging in really, really disgraceful sins. They would not even observe or consider themselves to be, they would not even go that far. The frontal war in Ramadan is not with the shahawat that are more connected to the bigger, the role of the devils, or the devils, or the shaitan. But what is more apparent is the subtle prompting of the ego. You become a bit more aware, vigilant about where they come from, who you are. There's a bit more knowledge psychologically about yourself, and you are, in a sense, I can put it this way, the best way you put, fasting is one of the most kind of polished mirror of the soul. So maybe issues you may not easily take seriously outside of Ramadan, your tongue, your eyes, your hands, your thoughts, you might not maybe take too much. In Ramadan, whether you like it or not, if you have a bit of reverence for this month, you become a bit more seriously vigilant about your senses, everything that your senses do. The exception, of course, here, and some of you might maybe bring this up in a question, is there is exception when the nafs actually is subject itself to a shaitan or a jinn, what the hadith calls the qarinul jinn. Qarinul jinn is that shaitan that is paired with every human soul, or jinn shaitan. He's paired with every human soul. That jinn does not really leave it doesn't leave you. It dies when the human soul dies. He dies with every human being. So that qarin, when this qarin is going to work, in a sense, he actually is one of, you could say, the employees or the staff of Iblis. And this is this qarin, of every human being has a qarin. This qarin is going to work for shaitan, but with your nafs. It works for the shaitan, but in order to effectively trigger certain sins, it's going to work with your amara bisu. That's why it's paired with your human. When the devils are chained, the amara is working solo, but when the devils are not chained, they're working together. That's why the Quran clearly says there is amara bisu and there's shaitan. There is waswasa the shaitan, the prompting of the ego. It clearly tells you that they are two different things. And the amara, the nafs amara, the soul or the ego that commands evil is paired with the shaitan. Your ego, when your ego or your nafs is merged, it becomes completely subjected to the qarin, to its own qarin. It becomes satanic. It becomes itself shayatinul jinn wal ins. There are shayatin of ins, of humankind, and the shayatin of the jinn. And then when your soul, your nafs al-ammara, it doesn't have nafs lawama, the blaming soul, nafs al-mulhama, the inspiring soul. When it has only the nafs al-ammara, and the more you subject it to the prompting of your qarin, of your jinn, the more it subject itself, eventually it will become under the order and subjugation of the shaitan. And itself, that's what happened. The exception in Ramadan, you might have some soul who absolutely does that. It's chained, but it's completely within that species of souls that are chained. So Ramadan is not even something someone would be observing if his or her soul has become satanic, really. If they observe, this is the key thing, if they observe out of shame or disgrace for the community or for because of their parents, they will feel trapped. A soul that is so kind of diabolical will feel trapped, chained. This is what it comes from. It will be, why? Because all the restrictions of Ramadan are going to take away all the passions, all the temptation that it seeks to cultivate. This is an important element to clarification for this hadith. So the one hadith I wanted to also quote is this one from Ibn Mas'ud. There is none of you who does not have his partner from, this is the Qarin part hadith. It says there is none of you who does not have his partner from among the jinn and his partner from among the angel put in charge of him. The hearers asked the Holy Prophet, ﷺ, does this apply to you, or O Messenger of God? He replied, it applies to me too, but God has helped me against him, against the Qareen, and he has accepted Islam. So he commands me to do only what is good. This is the exception when the Qareen is actually subjected to a purified soul, to a prophetic soul or a saintly soul, then the Qareen becomes nafs radiya or nafs mutma'inna. It actually commands you to do only good. This is, we can take up this. So just to begin, I'm not sure if I have overstepped my time, but let me just, this is the last, this last slide. We're talking about here, of course, of harvest, the Ramadan harvest. And I want to bring to your attention, because one of the unfortunate mindset, you could psychology of spiritual devotions in Ramadan, is that because we live in a highly consumerist society culture, high is not even the term, probably unprecedented in the history of the human history. We have never had such a an incredible like a disparity of money, disparity or excessive waste of food, excessive consumptions, culture of consumption, all of these, even consumptions of television, right? All the devices that have been so, frowned on and not even entertained in previous times. In our time, they have emerged, they have even affected and impacted a lot of Muslim societies, and even the culture behind them. One of the major Allah, I'm not going to call it sin, but it's a major, blind spot. Probably the worst is you could see the commercializations of Ramadan, because we experience a lot of commercialization in our time. Even when you go by the Gregorian holiday, your inner soul is no longer working with the phases of the moon. It's working with these phases of this culture, and Ramadan either becomes like almost Christmas month, right? It becomes like Christmas. And Laylatul Qadr is kind of similar to maybe Christmas evening, and sometimes even worse. It becomes like a Boxing Day. You are just waiting for that 24 hours. You want to fill your basket with as many as you bring your calculator. You want to calculate every single devotion, and you multiply it. This really gives you, this signals to you that you don't have a sound relationship with God. You actually don't have taqwa when you do this. When your mind is actually shaped, or the intention or the intention of your mind is quantitative, you can be sure that your fasting is not going to cultivate taqwa. This is an important element to keep in mind. I'm going to end with that, sure. But I want to end with this, because we spoke about abstaining from food, but there's also in our tradition, which is a holistic tradition, the Islamic tradition, the Prophet has not left one dimension of the human self that has not turned it into ibadah. So eating food, abstaining from food in Ramadan is, of course, is ibadah, but also is moderation, and also there is a certain attitude, conduct, adab, in consuming food, when actually, because when food consumption is a worship, this is actually a valid Islamic perspective. The consumption of food is a form of worship when that act of consuming is basically tied with the right intention, with basically, of course, the prayers, and of course the climate of how you actually consume the food. Consuming the food without, for example, Bismillah, without citing or invoking the name of God, as Rasulullah SAW says, he says everything that upon which the Basmala is not recited is actually cut. It is void, and it's barren. So that's a reason why we say Bismillah before we eat. But when we say Bismillah before we eat, and we are basically consuming, we have to be consciously aware that we are actually bonding with certain names of God. You cannot have a disjoint, disfragmented devotional life. Eventually, the purpose of taqwa, the purpose of the psychology of Ramadan is, of course, to unify. It's Tawheed, is to unify your soul. And to unify your soul means that every phase, every dimension of your fast has to be contemplative experience, including food. When you moderately consume food, when you consume it with khushu', with reverence. I began this whole session with saying that reverence or veneration, reverential veneration of the sacred month of God is what really qualifies, or what really confers incredible quality on your Ramadan. Maybe for some medical reasons, maybe some psychological, genetic reason, you cannot maybe perform 20 rak'ah, you cannot always finish the Quran 20 times or whatever, many times. But if you have veneration, for every act that you do, because eventually food is also manifestations of certain names of God. When you bond with this food, when you can contemplate them through the names, for example, Razzaq, the provider, the Mun'im, the benefactor, and through food, God gives you life. And so when you bring all facets, all dimensions, all these kind of vistas of the spiritual life into the Ramadan, then the way that you won't experience a breaking. There is no really breaking of devotion. You will no longer see the day as a devotional time of the day, and then after Maghrib, after sunset, there is almost like a free leisure time for your devotions. Actually, you have to bridge this. The important part is the bridging of the island. Bridging the island of fasting and breaking the fast. That's how I put it. You eventually want to do this through to every step of the day, bridging the island of fasting to the day. And when you transition to breaking the fast, you are still perpetually aware of that state of servitude toward God. You're always in a state of servitude when you are deprived or abstaining from food, and God is sustaining you spiritually, sustaining your soul, keeping you, preserving your health, and then He sustains you concretely through the blessings and graces of food. And so the scale of your soul, almost done. One of the things that I learned from my own teacher, my own masters, Hafidahullah, is to measure almost every devotion. Every devotion, you can measure yourself in it with the hadith of Jibreel. The hadith of Jibreel, most of you know it. You can Google it and you see it. The hadith of Jibreel is when Jibreel alayhi salam came to the Holy Prophet alayhi salam and asked him, "Oh Messenger of God, what is Islam?" He said, "Islam is shahada, la ilaha Muhammad Rasulullah." You have prayer, fasting, all the five pillars of the Islam. All of you know. I don't want to just run over time. Iman, all of you know what is Iman. Iman and tu'minu billah, you believe in God, the malaika, the kutub, the messengers, the last day or the day of judgment, and the decree of God, the good and the bad or the evil sides of the decree of God. What is ihsan? He said ihsan is to worship God as though you see Him, and if you don't see Him, and if you do not see God, surely God sees you. Fasting actually fits, every form of worship fits in that. You either are fasting on the plane of Islam. If you do, you are only fasting with your limbs, with your body. Why? Because every worship, the prescriptions of Islam, Hajj, Salat, Zakat, even fasting, they are done to the body, only physiologically. They are done to the limbs. You can just get the rewards by performing prayer. Aside from being really, instead of khushu' or contemplations or deep meditation, you pray, you observe your prayers physiologically, and you are rewarded. Same with Hajj. You go to Hajj, God is going to give you reward of Hajj. If you fast, at least abstaining from food. This is the limbs. You are either on this category, or you are in the category of Iman. The category of Iman is when you fast with your limbs and your heart, which means that you are actually working exactly on what the Quran or the verses of fasting was trying to convey. لعلكم تتقون كتب عليكم الصيام كما كتب على الذين من قبل لعلكم تتقون. So if you are during the fast during Ramadan also fixated and really fervently cultivating, refining your heart, then you are working on vices and all different elements or devotions. You want to actually come out of Ramadan with increased faith, with increased love and fervor and love of God and the Prophet. And this is Iman. This is, as we said, Taqwa is on the dimension of the heart. If you fast all of us wish for that, God willing, inshallah. If you fast with ihsan, you are fasting with your ruh, with your spirit. When you fast with your spirit, you actually do not even give any consideration to your devotions. You do not see that your fasting, your devotion, your recitation of the Quran, the cultivations of vices, maybe if you did overcome certain vices during Ramadan, all the things you do, all your qiyam, the tahajjud, if you are fasting with the spirit, you do not claim credit for them. You only see God. This is what ihsan says. Worship ihsan. What is your holy prophet? What is ihsan? Ihsan and ta'bud Allah ka'annaka tara, as though you see him. And if you don't see him, in lam takun tara innahu yarak. If you see God when you're worshiping, you cannot see yourself. Ihsan is if you are fasting, you are seeing that every act, every breath, every moment of your time, if you observe with health, this all comes directly from God. This is the fasting of ihsan. In the fasting of ihsan, you do not claim any credits for devotion. You only say alhamdulillah. This is the stations of prophecy, the stations of sainthood too. And you get the station of ihsan when Aisha radiallahu anha asked the Prophet alayhi wasalam, when he was up night vigil doing tahajjud, and his foot became swollen because of the qiyam, and she said, "Oh holy Prophet, why would you burden yourself with this devotion when God has forgave all your sins, and he created the paradise for you?" And he said, "Oh Aisha, alam akun abdan shakura." He said, should I not be, oh Aisha, should I not be a grateful servant? This is the station of ihsan. The station of ihsan, you are only grateful. You don't even say I did. You just say, you said alastu bi abdan shakura. You don't want to claim any credit. So one thing I want to finish with, the spirit of devotion in Ramadan. It's very important for a Muslim to develop a veneration for the moon calendar. The moon calendar, the phases of the moon they have a direct impact on the self, on the human spiritual cultivation, psychologically, spiritually, and physiologically. And what Ramadan does, Ramadan as a month is the zakat of all your year. That's why it says in Ramadan, in the hadith, that the doors of forgiveness are open. And by the end of Ramadan, if you observe your Ramadan, all of your sins are wiped out. What does it mean? It means that Ramadan, for 12 years of the month, if your Ramadan is observed with veneration, with good intention, with righteousness, the Ramadan is the zakat of your entire year. It actually cleanses every month of the year, right? So this is why the phases of the moon are important. And then if you develop Siyam of Shawwal, if you've developed this devotion of fasting twice a week, maybe the 3 days of the full moon of the lunar calendar, then you're going to see how this fasting every month is going to cleanse the previous month, and your soul is going to be much more naturally in line with the spiritual impact of the phases of the moon than the solar calendar. So there is, of course, you observe that if you in Ramadan, all of you, what happens in Ramadan, there is an otherworldly rhythm of the soul in Ramadan. Your soul is in another worldly rhythm. Your attention changes, your action, your speech, your breathing, your fast, your sleep, your consumption. There is an otherworldly. You actually, all the things that actually magnify all the concerns, the worries that you have about maybe job, about marriage, about children, about even illnesses. Somehow Ramadan elevates your soul, and you're experiencing an otherworldly rhythm, and the soul is so much attuned with the sacredness of the month. So one thing to take from this is really to have a deep veneration for how the cycles of the soul, the cultivation of the human soul, is actually really finely tuned with the phases of the moon. Laylatul Qadr, I pray all of you will have a blessed and graceful day, one night worth a lifetime. And partly why God, the Sahaba, the companion, used to fervently beseech God, oh God, give us another Ramadan, is only so if one time in your lifetime one day in your lifetime, you really, really apprehend or seize the Laylatul Qadr, you have already lived an entire life. And which means that if you really are worthy of it, if you harvest, if you actually plowed your field for a whole year, like the Sahaba, 6 months of veneration and waiting for Ramadan, 6 months asking God to accept your fast and your devotion, not be fixed on maybe I ask God in Ramadan because prayers are accepted. I ask him for a nicer car, maybe a nicer house, maybe a better career. No, talking about something much more taqwa, bondage with God, a real relationship with God. If in your lifetime God gives you many, so that maybe once in your lifetime you seize Laylatul Qadr. If you do, you have already lived. Your life will never be the same again. Nothing, everything is worth 70 years. One night in Ramadan is worth 70 years. So yes, it is an important and a very sacred night, but we have to remember that it's the God of Laylatul Qadr. You're not waking up for Laylatul Qadr. You are waking up, we are venerating God because God has actually placed that Layla, that night of revelation during this month. You do not worship it. That's the bigger problems and shortcomings for many of us is that we become merchant in Ramadan. We are just kind of trying to accumulate how many quantitatively. Let's go to Laylatul Qadr. Maybe even give a lot of money, a lot of charity in Laylatul Qadr. It's good, alhamdulillah, your intention might be right, but also maybe be a bit more trying to maybe cultivate, not become merchant, but servants of God. When you become a servant of God, God is going to give you a lot more when you venerate and have reverential love for God, for the Prophet and the sacred month and the rites, than if you do a lot of devotions and they are deprived of good intention. So where do we harvest the divine graces of Ramadan? This is one question. It's almost done. May Allah bring us another Ramadan. But where do you see where do you harvest it? Maybe you might say, maybe I got a new career. This might be I asked. Maybe I prayed God, I besieged God in Ramadan, and I got a better job. Maybe I have another child. Maybe my child is better. Alhamdulillah, may God give you all that you ask. But the real harvest after Ramadan, if you want to know if you really had a good harvest, you have to sit in your prayer, in your daily prayer. If Ramadan has actually, if it was a graceful, a blessed Ramadan that actually brought a deeper taqwa in your heart, you will not pray like you prayed before. This is why all the rituals of Islam, the 5 rituals of Islam, they are done once a year or maybe once a year. Ramadan is done once a year. Pardon me. Hajj is done once a year. Zakat is done once a year. So, but Ramadan, the Salat is every day until you actually pass away, right? So if you want to really put it in a scale, if you want to see the harvest of Ramadan, you look at how you pray after. Your prayer has changed, because that's the most direct manifestations of the harvest. The prayer is the first one you're asked about when you are judged. And it's as the Rasul ﷺ said, the prayer is the pillar of the religion. Who abandons it has disbelieved. So the prayer is the scale where you weigh your taqwa and all your worship. If your reverential love for the prayer has increased, for other rituals, every other ritual has become more deepened, maybe deepened. You have a deepened taqwa, and then this Ramadan was a good harvest. But not because you have received maybe a promotion in your job, maybe more money, but because you're bound with the Quran, you're bound with the Holy Prophet ﷺ, the bond with the Salat. This is where you harvest Ramadan afterward. If it decreases, if there is a loss of aspiration, then you know that your harvest was not really well done, was not really fruitful. I pray that all of you will have a very good harvest this year, inshallah, of the soul, and that your bond with the Quran before and after Ramadan it continue to increases, and of course increases especially with the love of the Holy Prophet ﷺ. So finally, I say that one way to actually maintain the aspiration of 6 months of being so almost connected, We cannot do it like Ramadan is Ramadan. The other months might not bring that spirit and that climate. But what you could do is you bring the fragrance, right? The fragrance of Ramadan revives your taqwa, the reverential love of God for the year to come. So, pardon me. So what if you? It's almost you can almost do that even physiologically. If you had a perfume that you were wearing in Ramadan, try to wear it wear it throughout the year, like just a spray every day, and this will bring both a physiological but also a spiritual fragrance. If the fragrance of Ramadan is with you throughout the year, then you can see, you can know, and you will of course, every Ramadan will be a place where you actually cultivate taqwa and revive it and restore it, and above all, exactly reverential love for God for the year to come. So Eid Mubarak to all of you. Apologies if I went over time. I think I did, and barakallahu fikum for really for sitting still and listening to my talk. Barakallahu fikum.
Barakallahu fikum, dear Ustad Ramzi Taleb. It was such a great presentation and lecture. I think I speak for all of the participants, including myself, that we really benefited and appreciated your mindful approach, and also reviving the spirit of the Sahaba. The whole hadith of, or the saying of how the Sahaba used to prepare, or 6 months before and 6 months after, was something very refreshing to revisit. Actually, the way the Sahaba, who were all trained by the best trainer of them all, the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasalam, devoted themselves to Ramadan beyond the month. So the whole year, people were waiting for this holy specific month of Ramadan. That was such a great reminder, to tell you the truth. And also the whole aspect of how materialism and capitalism has been infused into not only Ramadan and many other, Islamic, practices or traditions, which you also mentioned in a very excellent way, the connection to Christmas, are we, trying to find Laylatul Qadr or witness it as how the seculars are witnessing their traditions in West, or are we doing it according to our own sunnah and to our own, sacred tradition of Islam? And also using the Hadith Jibreel, the Islam, Iman, and Ihsan is such a great way to look at the fasting. How are you doing the fasting? Are you doing it with your limbs? Are you doing it with your heart? Are you doing it with your ruh? Which is also Islamic psychology. The whole essence of Islamic psychology is interconnect Islam, Ihsan, and Iman. And by that, connecting yourself with Allah Azza wa Jalla. So there are so many gems. And I think that we all should give you a round of applause. So please, excellent brothers and sisters, a round of digital applause to our excellent teacher and scholar, Professor Ramzi. Barakallahu fikum. We have some questions for you, Professor Ramzi, and I'm mindful of your time. So perhaps we'll take like 2-3 questions, and then we'll let you go, because I think, oh no, it's early in Germany. Okay, it's early in Canada.
It's okay. It's okay. I can take up questions.
I was more thinking about those who have iftar time now. So
yes.
Perhaps we have a lot of people from the Middle East and also from Southeast Asia. Perhaps it's iftar time. So let's start, dear excellent professor. So Brother Amir and Sister Menha, I think they're a couple. They're asking, by what process fasting causes or transforms into the reverential love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? How does fasting affect the Qalb, the metaphysical heart? Are there any physical processes involved that links fasting to Qalb or to Taqwa?
All right, that's a good question, mashallah. So yes, I mean, I brought this up in the earlier slides of the lecture. The abstention from food, what it does, at least physiologically. First, let me see that. So we are speaking about a spiritual heart. The spiritual heart is actually covered by certain layers. We are embodied being. We are not ruh. We are not malaika. Do not have an embodiment, right? So they are much more correct and much more directly in connection with God in terms of. But for us, we have coverage. We have veils. And the thickest veil for us is the physiological body. What fasting does distinctly, it actually, by abstaining from food, it's going to refine that layer between the qalb and the ruh. your spiritual heart, right? So the less you abstain from food, what we call reverential love of God or godliness, what is it? It's a direct awareness of the presence of God, right? It is a direct presence of God. That direct presence of God can be fogged or clouded when the physiological senses are thick. So what fasting does, it actually tappers. It actually is going to scrub that layers until you're in what we call en or basira. Actually, maybe a better way to do it, the heart is the basira. You have the sight and insight. So the basira is the meeting point between you and God. This is the ruh that God blew into you. And so fasting is going to try to diminish that, scrub it. And the deeper you get into that layer by not consuming food that actually thickens them, the consumption of food thickens the veil, then you are closer and you become, your insight, your basira becomes much more aware of the presence of God. And the presence of God is, of course, taqwa. Is reverential love. You have reverential love of something. If you see that, you are increasingly perceiving someone. If your teacher or your grandfather, you have reverential love for them. But when you see them, when you begin to see them after a certain absence, that reverence, that taqwa increases. It becomes a bit more magnified. So that's what the fasting is doing. It's going to clear up those clouds, those thick crests, eventually, so that your life, you're going to live everything that you do. You're cleaning your house, you're raising your children, you're driving. When the insight is refined through fasting, then you become much more perceptive of that, and the taqwa becomes a lot more visible.
Barakallahu fikum, Ustad. Thank you for a thorough answer and explanation. So we have Sister Zainab. She's asking, how can we take the spirit of Ramadan beyond, especially with our modern lifestyles, which is very disconnected from nature and also the spiritual heart?
This is a wonderful way to, a question that all of us ponder every time. And towards the end of the slide I spoke about, and one way to do it, it's absolutely not easy. And God knows that, of course. The Sahaba had the very, very high bar. The standards were very high. And Rasulullah SAW says, in his time, if the Sahaba practiced ninth of the religion, 9 of 10, they will not be actually saved. But for the later generation, if they practice at least fervently and sincerely just 1/10, and they will be by the grace of God saved. Because of course post-prophetic era is very difficult, even more so. Our cycle is it's probably the most difficult ever. So what you do is you can only carry the fragrance of Ramadan with you. One way for the spirit of Ramadan to actually stay with you is to have that fragrance. If you develop a certain fragrance for the Quran, there's a certain fragrance in your life, in your Ramadan, about the Quran. Maybe you won't be able to read the whole Quran, but at least you may, if you have reverential love for the Quran, which means it's a busy day, it's a busy month, it's busy, but every day, if it's just a few pages, maybe less half a juz or a third of it. But when you open the Quran, you have reverence. You have deep reverential love for that Quran. That is actually a lot more worth much more than if you open it and you're just trying to fast. This is a modern culture to fast speed your recitation. So Ramadan, if you want to bring it into Shawwal, you try to see, how do I bring the fragrance of devotion, of taqwa into my other? It's by actually, you have to actually be able to see if you can carry through that reverence for when you prostrate, when you pray maybe with short surahs, but if you have reverence, that spirit becomes walks through you, and God willing takes you to the next Ramadan with increased himma, aspiration, inshallah. I hope this addresses the question.
Barakallahu fikum, Professor. That was a great, excellent answer. Let's go to Sister Fatima. She's asking, there tends to be a sadness in the month of Ramadan, where we start feeling bad about ourselves and our lack of ability to perform the variety of works, Taraweeh, or rising in the morning, etc. What is the proper adab to inculcate regarding this in Ramadan?
Yeah, well, I suppose one way to approach this issue is to do again. I'm trying to tie this back always to the verse, لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ, right? So it's very difficult to disengage from maybe the quantitative dimension of Ramadan. It is a time where you want to increase your devotions, and you want to, and you might be, remorseful, but again, the context of every person, only God knows your context. And maybe you wake up for 2 rak'at for tahajjud, it's all right, or you do half of the Quran. I think that it's the remorse is tied a bit more to how much you want to do than how, reverential your devotion is going to be. If there's reverence, the reverential devotion, even if it's like Rasulullah SAW says, 2 rak'at, I mean, the hadith escapes me. If you consistently observe 2 rak'at of qiyam, of night vigil, consistently is a lot more. It's worth a lot more than if you observe many units of prayers, and then a month after Ramadan or down the road, you give up that practice. Consistency is much more directly connected to your intention and your reverence. If you have the right intention, then the 2 or 6 or 7, these are only depending on the context. Maybe in your lifetime you're celibate, you are young. God is going to give, the stretch of time is going to be longer. You might be doing a lot. If you are looking after your parents, if you're looking after an ill person, that's an ibadah in Ramadan. One of the bigger mistakes in time is if you think that if you are not lifting something, if you're not washing the dishes, if you're not cleaning, if you're not calling your dad or your mother, this is a big mistake. Devotions, sometimes when you increase quantitatively your devotion, you become egocentric. You want to say, I am doing things. It's not about I, it's about serving. It's about serving. When there's service and veneration, then God will only increase the barakah and tawfiq when there is the right service and veneration. The intention really qualifies the devotion. Maybe this Ramadan you didn't do a lot because maybe your mother needed help, maybe in the kitchen, or your dad needed help. This is magnified in the eyes of God, in the eyes of the Prophet ﷺ. If it was not magnified, I'll give the perfect example. One of the Sahaba asked the Prophet ﷺ, can he go with you for jihad, for one of the wars? And the Prophet asked him if he had a mother. He said, I have a mother, or or if he didn't have a mother, I think he said, I have an aunt. He said, serve her and you have what you want. So I think that's one way to see how, instead of being remorseful, just to see, well, God has putting you maybe in a context where you are teaching, you are grading, you are doing these things, you are looking after your dad, maybe he's not well, maybe psychologically they are not feeling well during the pandemic. Sit with them. This will be magnified in Ramadan. And if God gives you more time, then alhamdulillah. But remorse sometimes comes with quantity. It doesn't come when you just know, well, God puts me here, I'm just going to do my best. And alhamdulillah. And reverence is the key.
MashaAllah, such a great answer. And I really like that you referred to the quality versus quantity, because this is also part of the modern world, the modern psyche, the modern rationale. Everything is about quantity and not quality. Look at the mass production. Maybe 500 years ago, you built a house and you could still have it after 500 years. Today, everything is built for mass consumption. And the same goes with our devotions and our, perhaps in a sense, our notion of religious practice. And when I say we, I don't mean Muslims generally. I just mean we as those who want to, live as spiritually inclined lifestyle. I know people who are, perhaps going other spiritual paths or, religious in other traditions. They witness the same thing with their religion. So this is not just for Muslims to contemplate about. This is for all, religions, and also for humankind as a whole. And then you see like the whole aspect of not looking at ibadat as a holistic thing, which you're alluding to, Professor. Like ibadat could be, as you say, taking care of your father or mother who is sick, or ibadat could be, you doing your grades or doing your studies as a student. Yes, and that will be magnified during Ramadan, because to do like studies while you're fasting, it's not easy, so it takes even more time to contemplate, or to be in the process of tafakkur and contemplate what you're studying, into connecting to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, perhaps doing dhikr while you're studying. So I think that what you're saying is a good reminder for all of us as believers, as mu'mins, as servants of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that we need to have this holistic approach when it comes to both devotion, ibadat, spiritual practice, and also our view of deen and Islam, our beautiful deen. So alhamdulillah, thank you for reminding us about that, and I guess also sometimes people feel like, specifically in some countries, Professor Ramzi, like right now in Sweden is a little bit better, but like a couple of years ago, our, time frame between Maghrib and Fajr was perhaps 3.5 hours. And in that 3.5 hours, you need to do iftar, be with your family, go to the masjid, do the taraweeh, do the Isha prayer in congregation, do the taraweeh, then do tahajjud and do suhoor, and then also do Fajr prayer in a matter of 3 hours, And I saw that people sometimes felt very stressed and very stretched. And perhaps, and I understand because I felt that as well, so this is really not to judge anybody, including myself, but perhaps to apply what you're saying is to do your best in a sense, do the best, have the good intention, have the pure intention, do your best. And even if you might not be able to do everything, at least try your best to do as much as possible, and to be assured that even being with your parents, doing iftar with them, because there might not be in health enough to go to the masjid, or maybe they cannot, travel because they are, because it's COVID right now, whatever, being with them is also ibadat, to not let them be alone, So that's a very good reminder, really, for all of us, and mostly for myself, as a person with so many errors in my own character, to always learn. Thank you for reminding us. Barakallah fikum. Let me see. There are a couple of more questions. So let's go to Brother Ahmed is asking, is nafs al-amara same with shahawat? I don't understand the question, actually. Is nafs amara same with shahawat?
I think I understand a bit the question.
Okay.
He's trying to, if I understand, he's trying to say if the passions of the soul are actually they are the operations of the nafs al-amara bisu, the passions,
exactly.
right? Yeah. Yes. I mean, yes and no. In a sense, of course, it's your nafs. It is in you, and the passions are yours, right? So the passions usually are, of course, there's a whole mechanism. Certain passions are triggered. They are triggered by the prompting of Satan. But for example, not every passion, for example, is a vice, right? The problem with amara, the amara bisu, it's the boundary that actually it violates. So if we don't have certain, for example, the sense of smelling or tasting, we cannot eat food. We cannot sustain ourselves. If someone doesn't have other faculties, if your faculties that carry these passions are not operative, you might not actually engage in all different sort of devotion. For example, hearing is devotion, listening is devotion, looking. But it's a passion when it's not doing the right thing. If you're not listening to something that is really, sacred, then that becomes the passion of the soul, right? So the difference between the passion, the nafs of amara, yes, because the nafs amara is reflecting the kind of sort of the out of bound passion. When the amara is doing something that is not licit, that is not actually permissible, it's doing a passion and it's bringing that passion outside of the formal boundaries of the Sharia. So that you could say, yes, the amara bisu is passion when those passions are not justified by the moral code of the Quran. But the amara is not passion when those passions are practiced within the Islamic norm. The passions with the husband has for his wife, the wife for her husband, but also other faculties. I mean, you could say the passion of looking. If you are looking at the Quran with your eyesight, that's not strictly say a passion. This is like a reverential worship. There's a worship of the eyesight, but the eyesight becomes an amara bisu, a passion of the soul, when it's watching certain things on TV that or people outside that are just completely they're not pleasing to God. So that's what amara so is only doing things that are outside of the boundary, that it's the violations of these passions. So more or less, this is how you should understand that. But on a last note, you have to understand that the passions, if they are practiced within the moral code of the Quran, they are forms of worship, of ibadat, forms of worship. When you violate the moral code of the Quran, then it's your amara bisu who's actually activating or setting these motions and these passions in motion. So as I said earlier, just an example, the consumption of food becomes an act of worship when it's done with the basmala, when it's done with the hamdallah, when it's done with contemplating the actual revelations of these names that actually feeds you. Same thing when same thing with if you overconsume, if you waste, that's the boundaries that the amara violates. So this applies to everything in your life. I hope that helps.
Thank you so much for a great explanation. And I think just to connect to what you're saying, dear professor, is always to look at all the things that Allah has given us could be for our benefit if we practice it in a correct way, according to the balance, or in a living upon the moderation, as you spoke earlier, or mizan, the balance, the divine balance that like for instance, anger could be a passion. If it's not controlled, then nafs amara will put it into just killing for the sake of killing, or swearing or cursing, all these bad things. But if you manage it in a good way, then you can actually protect your family if you need that, or that's what Imam Ghazali speaks about when it comes to adab, or you could actually, if you want to get food. Like today, you don't need to go and hunt to get food, or you go to the store. But I think traditionally in fitri societies, a hunter needed, to use the anger in a constructive way. So I guess that's also with love, for instance, like this too much ishq, which a lot of the traditional scholars spoke as something negative. When you're loving, perhaps I'm not married, but let's say if you're married, like you love your husband or your wife more than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or you, not that you cannot love them, but it's over, like almost that you're projecting this loss of Allah because maybe you're not in touch with your fitra and the divine names, and you're projecting that subconsciously into human figures or to material, like it could be I love my phone or I love my computer. So I think what you're saying is so interesting in many ways. Barakallahu fikum, Professor. Let's see here. So we have 2 questions left, and it's from the same couple, mashallah.
Sure.
All right, so let me see here. Needs to go. All right, you need to go to exam. Sister Fatima is writing. How much time do you have, Professor? Because you're so generous. Shall we take a last question? Is it okay? And then
no, I have time. I can take more. I still have about an hour and a half before I go to an engagement. But I can take questions. Bismillah.
All right, so we just have 2 questions here. So I go briefly. So is nafs a living being that incites to evil? Does nafs has its own free will? When to incite, who to incite, and how to incite? Who does the nafs incite to evil, and how does the nafs communicate?
Can you just one more time repeat this question? Yes.
All right. So is nafs a living being that incites to evil? I think that they're alluding to nafs al-amara. Does nafs has its own free will? When to incite, who to incite, and how to incite? Who does the nafs incite to evil, and how does the nafs communicate?
Right. Well, okay. Well, the nafs is you. It's there's no duality there. There is no real duality. It's just the nafs is your impulses. This is your impulses. Those impulses. What the nafs al-amara, what it does, if you were to put it this way, you have many grades, many dimensions of the self, but the nafs al-amara is the one that actually works in pair, in conjunction with the satanic forces or the whispers and whatnot. But that's you actually kind of align yourself with you could say the dark forces. That same nafs amara bisu can become a nafs amara bil khair. it can become a soul that commands you to do only good. So what happens, it's a question of you undergoing transformation, right? The more spiritually transformed you become, the less the nafs al-amara has an authority on your decisions, right? So and then when you are subjected to the authority of the nafs al-amara, then what happens? Then your free will is going to be used to do something that God does not approve of, or the Holy Prophet alayhi salam. All of this is just you. The nafs al-amara eventually is going to, in a sense, it's a filter, and eventually the nafs al-amara is just the furthest kind of reflection of yourself, right? And eventually what it does, as you work intensively on yourself, you're going to actually find the center of who you really are. The amara bisu is your superficial impulses. It's just your impulses that you have developed and cultivated. But the more you dig deeper, when you reach the heart or the spirit, then you just know who you really are. When you know who you really are, the amara does not have any authority on you. You're going to only do, when you know who you really are, you're only going to do what God loves, nothing else. So the amara is not, you're going to have a chain, the authority of the amara. But it's only, there's no multiple personalities or individualities in the soul. These are just impulses, facets of the soul. Either they incline on one side, on the left side, they become a bit darker, or they go on the right side, they become, and you become but more luminous. The more you approach the heart, the more you become radiant, and the less the nafs al-amara has an authority of you. But it's all you. It's all you, and all that your work. Even the amara bisu is kind of a gateway. You have to break through it to actually go to the nafs al-lawama, the remorseful soul, and then you go to the inspiring. But all of this, they are just reflections of dispositions, of impulses that you've cultivated. And if you refine them, they become virtues, and it's all you. When you become a virtuous person, you only work through your heart. You don't need even your nafs, right? Your nafs al-amara doesn't even have an authority over you. I hope that helps you.
Barakallah fiqh, such a great explanation. We're getting so many gems from you today, dear Ustad. Barakallah fiqh. This will be the last question, Ustad, and we will let you go after that. You've been so generous with your time. So barakallah fiqh, really. Thank you so much for being so generous. And please forgive us for any shortcomings, dear Ustad. So we have a question regarding fasting, as well as painful trials of patience are always hard on ourselves. How does fasting and trials of patience generate the feeling of reverential love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, whether behind reverential love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is always a fear of his punishment, or fear of losing his reward in Jannah, or fear of losing his love? Can reverential love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ever be without fears?
Oh yes, very good question. Well, I mean, you see, we are working with a non-Arabic language, right? So yeah, we don't have the choice of, but reverential love is a better way than reverential fear. But reverence, if you don't have reverence, you really cannot have any spiritual relationship with God or the Holy Prophet, right? So the idea of fear, God, I mean, it's very difficult to. God does not have the anger of a human being or the wrath of a human being, right? God only works with you through His love. He doesn't work with anything else, right? He doesn't even. Take this really seriously. I'll give you an example, and it will give you a very good example of the all-consuming pedagogical teaching of the Quran. When Musa alayhi salam was in Surah Taha, or many narrative in the Quran, is asked by God to go to Pharaoh to actually declare himself as a prophet and a messenger, and ask him to follow his way. If you read really carefully Surah Taha, you're going to see that the God asked the Prophet Musa to speak with Pharaoh very gently, right? Very gently. You read Surah Taha, you're going to have remember that Pharaoh was the guardian of Musa. Pharaoh, who actually we think as the most kind of demonic soul, that is the person who was in the station of Musa's father, and God wanted to honor that. He wanted to honor that relationship. Why? Even if your father is not actually very a Muslim, or maybe not really practicing, or very angry, remember that God tells you you owe him gentle discourse, you owe him gentle speech, and so forth. So look at the pedagogy. God could have just said, Musa, he is a tyrant, and I'm going to wipe out this person from Egypt. But no, the language of divine love doesn't use that. He said, go to your guardian. He raised you, he fed you, he groomed you, and you owe him sitting down before him, and you speak to him gently. لَعَلَّهُ يَخْشَى. So maybe he will, have some reverence. So the idea of fear is that God has this pedagogy with tyrant, what do you think is his pedagogy toward people who follow the Holy Prophet? There is no pedagogy of fear. There's pedagogy of protection. God actually, if you could put it this way, again, we're not going to be anthropomorphizing this, but God spends more time caring about your own good than your parents, right? He's actually much more watchful of you overstepping certain, boundaries and falling, and actually succumbing to very bad consequences. But when you have reverential love, you're not fearing punishment. Reverential love is a very deep, deep bonding with God. You do not worship God because you are a merchant. You worship God because of the infinite, boundless care and benevolence that God actually has given you from the day you were born. Let me tell you this, and you know this in the tradition. The easiest thing to do in Islam for Muslims who follow the Prophet is really to be granted Jannah. The Prophet ﷺ actually, said anyone, at least in one generation, anyone who says La ilaha illallah and believe in it is going to be saved. That's fine. But what about your relationship with God? God is going to take every excuse to forgive you. Every excuse God is going to take to wipe out every sin. Even, all of you know, if you pray just one salah, you perform a salah, you recite Ayatul Kursi afterwards, all the sins before you are wiped out. In every Jumu'ah, the same thing. This is literal. A lot of us do not believe that. We don't actually believe that on Jumu'ah or every day, God can actually wipe every single sin we've committed so far. But that's the case. He does. He actually does. He does do this. So the problem then, it's not really, it's not really, I'm doing the right thing to be granted, entry to paradise. God is going to find every reason to put you in paradise. Every reason. You have to be really, really an evil. The question is, the reverential love is whether or not your heart is filled with God when you prostrate. That is the real meaning of your life. If you have that, then you understand reverential love is really the deepest meaning of your living in this life. If you have not really cultivated that, you're going to be lost as a merchant. Maybe you can get a lot in the afterlife, but you will never get to know who the love that actually brought you to life. So reverential love is good because you fear, in a sense, you have a reverence for not, you have etiquette. Reverential love is adab with God. You're just adab, and you're gonna slip, and you might slip really hard, but you can be sure that if you have some reverence for God, that slip is gonna be gonna be a gateway to even deeper relationship to God. This is an important thing. So if you want this is the beauty of the Quran. If you read with the Quran and the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ, you will never find the Prophet actually cursing Quraysh. He never does that. He never curses his enemy. They only speak through love. There was only one reason that Muhammad ﷺ, our Prophet, he had one single intention. He just wanted Quraysh and his enemy to really experience a meaningful relationship with God more than anything else. And he wished that for every single one of them. This is the difference. This is very different. And then when you love the Prophet, if you have reverence for the Prophet, then that just tells you that you have good adab. Without adab, you cannot go and know God or the Prophet or even yourself. So fear, God is not waiting to punish people, right? He's actually just taking every step to protect them. And if their intention is just to get to do decent worship and then go to hell, he's gonna give you this. But if you really want to know God, I mean, you live with your parents all your life. If you didn't have your parents, you would want to know them. But imagine you don't know God in this life and in the next life, you actually do not know Him. This is a real remorse. So fear is sometimes really used of course, in the Quran. If you don't have fear, you don't have justice. If God doesn't really frighten certain, evildoers, then you will never have justice, right? And sometimes it's followed by punishment. Same thing with parents. You can never raise a good Muslim child if you don't use, on one hand, fear, and on the other hand, love, because it's just how the soul is. The soul has impulses, it has boundaries. But if you cultivate reverence for your dad, you're not gonna pick up, or your father or your mother, you're not gonna serve her because you want to tell her, I'm paying you back. This is what you say. This is disgrace. If you tell your parents, I'm doing this because you did something for me. You do it because reverential love is this way. I just put it this way. When the Holy Prophet ﷺ was about to pass away, his daughter Fatima had one wish. It was to not live without him, right? And then God granted her to pass away just 6 months after this. So this is a love. It's not because she's afraid of dying. She wants to be in Jannah, or this is deep reverential love. That is the meaning of everything you read in the Quran, and everything. If you want every relationship with the Prophet, the Ahlul Bayt, the Sahaba, it goes down to love. So fear has a pedagogical function, but it's not the purpose of revelation, right? Like that's God always says, my mercy outstrips my anger. So put it this way, and I hope and ponder how the Quran speaks to the people of every prophet. The God is going to always be soft every step the way until there is no more option. This is how God does it, let alone with people who pray and follow the Holy Prophet.
Barakallahu feekum, Ustad. That's such a great way to wrap this lecture with you, and really for parenting as well, to use that as a pedagogical movement, a pedagogical tool to work with tarbiyat of our children and ourselves. Such a great advice, really, to find, to put the boundaries, but still within the boundaries you have love, so that's the thing. Like, I think sometimes we find the extreme, at least here in West, either no boundaries at all, then the children just get a lot of love, and don't know like where the boundaries are, even when they go wrong, or the opposite, where you just give punishment, which is not beneficial. So that's a beautiful way to wrap this up. I want everybody, if you're possible, dear brothers and sisters, to give round of applause to our excellent teacher and Murabi, Professor Ramzi. Thank you so much for taking your time. May Allah bless you. May Allah bless your family. Please keep us in your precious du'as, dear Ustad, and you will be in our du'as as well, and your family as well. Thank you for your generosity of giving your time. Thank you to all excellent brothers and sisters from all over the world for participating today. I hope this lecture was of benefit for all of you. We have a couple of days left in this holy month of Ramadan, and inshallah, we will keep the spirit of Ramadan, as Professor Ramzi so eloquently said, post-Ramadan as well. So it's not a post-traumatic trauma as we feel sometimes when we lose something. Rather, we always internalize it and keep the spirit with us alive, according to all the great gems that Professor Ramzi gave us. So thank you for joining us, dear excellent brothers and sisters. And without any further ado, could you just end this session, dear Professor Ramzi, with just closing du'as for all of us, inshallah, if it's possible.
Yes, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Inshallah, we'll do it, but there's nothing better to end the session with Surah Al-Fatiha and the Salat on the Prophet ﷺ. So I ask all of you to just recite with me Surah Al-Fatiha. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim, Maliki Yawmiddin, Iyaka na'budu wa iyaka nasta'in, Ihdina as-sirata al-mustaqim, Sirata alladhina an'amta alayhim, Ghayri al-maghdubi alayhim wa ad-dallin. Ameen. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala ali Sayyidina Muhammad, kama sallayta ala Sayyidina Ibrahim wa ala ali Sayyidina Ibrahim, wa barik ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala ali Sayyidina Muhammad, kama barakta ala Sayyidina Ibrahim wa ala ali Sayyidina Ibrahim fil alameen, innaka Hamidun Majid. Subhana rabbika rabbil izzati amma yasifun, wa salamun ala al-mursaleen, walhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Thank you everyone for joining me, for bearing with me. I know some of you might probably just breaking fast, or barakallahu fikum. I pray that all of you will find just abundant of grace in your life, your neighbors, your relatives. Yeah, and of course, one thing I also encourage all of you to do, there's a lot of people have passed away in your lives. And we should not remember, you should always remember, we still can have an impact on their state afterlife. So remember them, dedicate Fatiha to the deceased, dedicate Yasin to the dead. It's not only the living, we are part of a tree. We are fasting because our ancestors venerated the Ramadan, because they had deep love for the tradition. Do not forget them. They are now with God. And every Fatiha, every dua, this is how you kind of come out of your ego, and you are just thinking of others. Think about the people who passed away, think of people who are sick, and just pray for others. The more you do, the more you think about others, the more God thinks about you. That's how, this is how the dynamic. So I pray, inshallah, that all of you, and if you've lost people, may Allah grant them, peace and love. Amen. And may they all be in, sitting by in the presence of the Holy Prophet and his family. And inshallah, maybe we'll see you again in another session.
Inshallah, we'll look forward to do more sessions with you, Professor. It will be such an honor. You have so much to learn us. Send our regards to your family. Jazakallah khairan. Ramadan Kareem. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. So without any further ado, dear brothers and sisters, we will end the meeting now. Thank you all for joining us. Let me stop recording.